So our next speaker on the agenda is Patrick Solomon with the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission, and he is going to be discussing non-native species and Arkansas native biodiversity. So take it away, Patrick.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that, technical difficulties. Real quick, what I heard in one of the last things I heard in Ray's presentation, he talked about mowing in late July or around July to kind of invigorate flowering plants. I've noticed on several of our natural areas that especially in roadside ditches where the counties will mow in July and sometimes August, it's amazing how the milkweeds really respond to that really well. It's kind of crazy how they'll pop up and reflower. And in fact, I think I was down in Miller County in Southwest Arkansas, and there was some ironweed on the side of Highway 67 that had already gone to seed. It was starting to dry up, but they had mowed a strip along the highway, and some of the ironweed had reflowered. It was pretty incredible. That was maybe a couple of months ago. But I'm going to talk to you guys today about non-native invasive species, especially regarding plants and on natural areas. So I work for the Arkansas Department of Heritage. We've changed, actually. It's now the Division of Arkansas Heritage, and we're now part of the Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. So you may be familiar with this really old logo, and by really old, I think it's like 7 years old, that we changed to this logo now. So this is our agency. If you see us, say hi out in the field. Real quick, we manage several different natural areas throughout the state. I think we've added 2 or 3 since this map was made. So I think there are 75 now in total, and over 66,000 acres is what we're managing. So I'm going to talk to you about non-native species. This is kind of the kinder the kinder non-alien species, but really want to talk about species that are highly invasive and kind of are a little bit more dangerous to deal with. But before I do that, I'd like to show a little video that is pretty interesting. It kind of reflects how species get introduced to North America, or how they have been introduced to North America, and also how we can compound the problems. So if you don't mind, I'm going to real quick try to show this video. Hopefully you can see it.
Is there sound with it?
I believe there is.
If you have not already done so, in the upper right-hand corner with the menu option, you need to share your computer's audio so they can hear it too.
Okay. Let me know if doesn't cooperate.
The incredible story of how the hippopotamus almost became a staple of the American diet. In the early 1900s, the United States began to experience a meat shortage. Overgrazing, overpopulation, and a surging demand abroad were the main causes. At the same time, southern Louisiana was being overtaken by an invasive species, water hyacinths, which were transported there as a gift from the Japanese delegation during the 1884 World's Fair. The hyacinths multiplied like rabbits, entirely covering swamps, bayous, rivers, and other water bodies, making navigation by boat almost impossible, destroying shipping routes, and greatly affecting local ecological systems. In less than 20 years, Louisiana was covered in water hyacinths. The Army even tried pouring oil on them and setting swamps on fire. But the seeds can survive for almost 30 years. Louisiana Congressman Robert Broussard gathered 2 partners, adventurer and Boy Scout founder Frederick Burnham, and Fritz Duquesne, a big game hunter who spied for Germany during both world wars. The partners created the New Food Supply Society with the goal of importing hippopotamuses to Louisiana. They argued the hippos would eat all the hyacinths that were covering the water and would provide a significant source of meat for the South. Amazingly, the plan had the full support of Teddy Roosevelt and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In 1910, Broussard introduced H.R. 23621, also known as the American Hippo Bill. The plan would have cost $250,000 at the time, about $6 million today. It had the support of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other major papers. The New York Times even wrote how excited it was for lake cow bacon. The bill failed by 1 vote, and while Burnham and Duquesne both tried to continue the project, the Mexican Revolution and World War I would eventually draw away their attention, and the plan was forgotten. Today, the state of Louisiana spends millions of dollars regularly spraying herbicides to destroy the water hyacinths.
So hopefully you heard that.
We did. Thank you, Patrick.
All right. I think that video is pretty interesting in that it kind of tells the history of water hyacinth in North America, and also I think you'd call that a biological control that was kind of thought of and almost introduced into North America. I would personally be interested in trying some of that lake cow bacon. But I have some other ideas for introductions to deal with some non-native invasive species, particularly dealing with our wild hog problem in the state. But you can imagine that those that would just create other problems. So just to address that again, a lot of the species that we have in North America have an interesting history like that. Kudzu is one of the most well-known non-native invasive plants we have in North America, and that was originally introduced through a World's Fair and at one time promoted by the U.S. government as a tool to use as erosion control along highways, and also as a forage crop for cattle and grazers. Unfortunately, it escaped, and it's the problem that we have now. One really good example of it being along the highway is on I-40 headed towards Memphis. You can really see it there as you go over Crowley's Ridge on the east side of Forest City. You get a really good view of the kudzu that was used there originally. But real quick, I'll talk about some characteristics of invasive plants. They have abundant seeds or propagules with high germination rates. They spread by rhizomes or runners, as well as by seed. They have effective dispersal, whether it be through wind, water, birds, or other wildlife or people. And they lack the predators or diseases where they are introduced. So if you have a lot of experience with non-native invasive plants, you can probably think of several plants that have these characteristics that we are constantly dealing with. And I would say we'll get into management techniques a little bit later, but managing against non-native species really, for us, or for me, it's incorporated into our management of the natural areas. Chinese privet is a really well-known, very cosmopolitan plant. It's all over the state, and it has effective seed dispersal. It actually, right now, if you know where privet is, I know I have some right outside our front door. It's got purple seeds on it right now. They've gone from green to purple, and there are thousands of them per stem. And birds are eating them up right now and spreading them that way. Privet also likes to be around water, so those seeds are dropping in the water and spreading through into riparian areas. Another characteristic of privet is that it can spread vegetatively, so it shoots off different runners, and eventually that can produce an entirely different plant. So that makes it really hard to get rid of, not only the seeds that are always spreading, but also having to deal with a very strong root system. Real quick, this is a neat little factoid that is it's based on some aged information, but it kind of gives you an idea of how much non-native, how many non-native plants we have in the state of Arkansas. So about 77.5% of the vegetation you see in the state at any given time is native species, but about 22.5% is non-native. If you've ever seen a list of the non-native plants that exist in Arkansas, it's a real long spreadsheet. It's just hundreds and hundreds of non-native plants that exist in the state. So a lot of the time, a lot of presentations that I give are to master naturalists in the state. They're eager to learn about our native biodiversity and how we protect it. And for some of these folks, it may be the first time that they're being introduced to non-native plants. And so one way I like to try to make that, introduce them, I guess, into non-native invasive plant management is to liken our natural areas that we manage to a garden, except for instead of corn and squash, we have a garden that consists of our native biodiversity. And so for your garden, if you're looking to protect your produce and have a good yield, you're going to be removing weeds, anything that's not what you had planted in that garden. And so for our natural areas, our produce are the native plants and the native biodiversity, I suppose, that depend on those native plants. And so the weeds for us are the non-native species like privet, like kudzu. So we're going to want to remove those from our garden. I think, I'm not sure how many people are on this, but I think a lot of folks here are probably already familiar with non-native invasive species. But that's just one tool I like to use to kind of introduce people to the concept. So when we're dealing with the weeds in our garden, a big important strategy is to have strategic planning. You're not going to want to just start off willy-nilly because you will quickly drive yourself crazy. Dealing with non-native invasive species can be a permanent part of your management. So first, you're going to want to strategically map the area. This is a map based on some work that we have done in Faulkner County at a natural area called Cove Creek Natural Area. It's just north of Worcester. We didn't have public access to this natural area until recently. We got an easement to build to use that road for public access about 5 years ago. And we started to go there more often, and we started to notice that there was a big privet problem. Chinese privet had really taken hold on the natural area, especially in the riparian areas. So one of the first things we did to address the problem is that we went through the entire area and mapped all the privet. And so in the map on the right, you can kind of see how the privet is in the red, and it's concentrated really on the riparian areas close to Cove Creek, and then in a lot of the draws that exist on the natural area. So based on that map, we made a strategic plan on how to begin to eliminate privet on the natural area. So when you're dealing with non-native invasive species, one important thing is that there's no magic bullet. There's no one tool that we have that can eliminate the species. Fortunately, we have a lot of tools that we can use that are in our toolbox, and I'll go through some of those management techniques that include chemical herbicide. So there are different ways of applying chemical herbicide. You can get training on chemical herbicide through the Arkansas State Plant Board, and they actually are the licensing folks, and the training is given through the Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service. They usually have their training programs in March. If you're interested in learning about chemical herbicides and a safe way to use them, and also strategic ways to reduce the amount of chemicals that you put onto an area, I would highly recommend going and looking for their training events. So yeah, there are different ways that different tools we have that can reduce the amount of chemical herbicide that we're putting onto the property. Another technique, mechanical removal. So that includes seed removal, pulling roots by hand. Mowing would be a good mechanical removal technique. And biological controls. So goats, cattle are a good tool if you're able to use them. Another example of a biological control is the kudzu bug, although there was a problem with that, and I don't quite have all the details, but I think they were developing a bug or bringing a bug over from kudzu's native range over to North America to use that bug to as a natural predator on the kudzu. Unfortunately, I think it was released on accident and posed a problem as it got into soybeans during the growing season. I don't think it is widespread in the state. I think that bug is maybe still located around Crowley's Ridge, but that's another example of how a bright idea became a big problem as far as our reaction to the non-native species. Fire also is a very important, very useful tool, both broadcast burns over large areas at once, and also hand torches are very useful. I've used hand torches in a number of different settings. You can purchase them through forestry suppliers or Gimplers, I think, and it just is a hand wand that attaches to a gas tank that you would use on your grill, a natural gas propane tank, and you just use a spark to light the end of the wand, and you can apply direct heat to any. I think they use them a lot for roofing. When they're roofing, I guess they want to heat up the tile so that they melt together. It's the same concept, but it's pretty neat in that you can use it even if it's really high humidity or even raining, you can use it to kill vegetation that's on the surface. So here's an example of backpack spraying. So on the strategy part of it, and this picture is a good example, this is at Iron Mountain Natural Area near Mena, is we have, I think a lot of that on the ground, that green vegetation is periwinkle. And so this is probably late November, early December, the picture was taken, and you can see how the native vegetation is going dormant, but periwinkle is a evergreen, non-native plant. So you can use that to your advantage by treating the periwinkle in the wintertime. That reduces the amount of herbicide that you would unintentionally get on native species or the species that you're trying to protect. Here's an example of ATV spraying. Again, that's Japanese honeysuckle in the background. This is during the dormant season. Japanese honeysuckle is an evergreen species, so it's a really good time to spray over the Japanese honeysuckle. It kind of eliminates the risk you take of treating unwanted species and really helps you to concentrate on the Japanese honeysuckle. This is an example of the cut and treat method. That's a Bradford pear tree, and we've just cut it down and then applied the herbicide to the outside of the tree. Mowing, another example of mechanical removal. And for bigger projects, we've used a forestry mulcher. This is at Cove Creek, where we saw the map with the red that represented the privet hedge there. So this is in the thick of that privet infestation, and you can see how it was just a dense thicket of privet that you really couldn't even walk through. So that really required us to bring out the big guns, and so the forestry mulcher was able to come through and really mulch down a lot of that vegetation and make it so that in the next spring we were able to come back and spot spray the resprouts. So that can get a little bit expensive, but it was something that really just needed to happen for that project. And this also is a good example of how you can use multiple tools on the same issue to really compound your effectiveness. So we originally brought in the forestry mulcher. It mulched down the privet and made the area easier to access. Then we came in the spring, we treated resprouts, and now we're getting the area into a natural burn cycle where we're burning it once every 2 to 3 years. And the plan is that the burning will eventually help to manage or eliminate the privet while also invigorating the native species. Real quick, I don't know if you guys are going to have anybody present on iNaturalist, but I'm going to take a little bit of a moment to talk about iNaturalist. I hope that's all right, Leslie. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, it's an app that you can download for your smartphone or your computer, and you can find it at www.inaturalist.org. It's a really cool tool. It helps basically to map different species in the state. It's kind of a social network in that you can share what they call observations, which are basically photographs that you've taken of different species and uploaded them onto the app. But they like to say that they're not collecting any secret information on you. If you choose to share it on the social aspect of the app. One important thing also is to say that you don't actually have to use the social aspect. You can just use the tools that they provide. And there's another app that they've come out with. It's very similar to iNaturalist, but it's called Seek. And so if you go and look at your App Store or the Google Play Store, you can look for Seek, and it is an app that has the same tools but does not have any of the social observation stuff on it. And so you can see, if you go to their website, here's a map of the United States and all the observations that have been made in the United States. So I'm real quick want to get to the part that's kind of useful for non-native invasive species or identification purposes in general. So if you have a smart device or a camera, you can take a picture of a plant or anything that's alive, basically, and it will help you to identify what is in the picture. They call that computer learning. I think that's also similar to artificial intelligence, but they've basically taken a whole bunch of photographs that have been tagged as different species, and the computer is able to use that information it already has to identify the photograph that you've taken based on what it's seeing in the photograph. And I'm not a computer wizard, so that's pretty that's a pretty simple explanation of it. But let me show you. If I was in the field several months ago up in Sharp County, and I came across this really interesting plant. It was just near kind of a draw in a riparian area, and it looked like an orange tree. And I was like, holy cow, this is interesting. I think I just really found the rarest plant in the state of Arkansas. And so I took a picture of it and I toggled it over into the observation part of iNaturalist, which is just right here. You drag it in to the area, and it helps you to identify that plant. So if you see here, I put the photo in to the drag area, and then if you go down, I actually loaded 7 images of that plant, but went in there and then I hit the species name, and that is the tool that helps you to identify what is in your picture. And so when I hit that tool, it came up with these recommendations of what it thought was in the picture. And you can see here on the first, one of the first suggestions is trifoliate orange. And it shows you that it's visually similar, and also it's been seen nearby. So based on other photographs or other observations that folks have made, that's what it bases its recommendation on. And so if you actually go and you hit the view tab right here, it will tell you more about the plant. And it turns out that trifoliate orange is not a rare native plant. It's actually a really bad non-native invasive species that we have in the state of Arkansas. Using the more social aspect of iNaturalist, I was able to actually map that onto a map in the state, which is right here. It should be up right around in here, and make plans to go back and treat that plant. So I guess I did a little, wanted to slip that in to say, if you're interested in non-native invasive species, but you don't trust your identification skills, then I would highly recommend using iNaturalist. It's useful for also just identifying basically anything that is that is an animal or plant. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. And here is the Seek app. If you're not interested in the social aspect of it, you can just download that, and it has the same tools. But I think that's about it. I usually give this presentation to master naturalists, and they have a 3-hour presentation slot. So I really had to skim it down quite a bit, but hopefully you got some useful information out of it. Some other useful websites are, let me see. So I think this website has actually changed, but if you Google University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture, Research and Extension and non-native invasive species, they'll have some really good information, particular for Arkansas, about the non-native species that we have in the state, useful for identification purposes and also management techniques. The Southeastern Exotic Pest Plant Council has a lot of information about non-native plants that we have in the state. Real quick, in this picture, you can see I believe that's Kogon grass, which is a plant that is not known to be in the state of Arkansas, but is on the other side of the Mississippi, just waiting to jump over and get into the state. I've heard it's a really bad plant that we'd rather not have to deal with. And that's about it.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was an awesome talk. I know it's such a short time slot,
Oh,
but
yeah.
folks can definitely reach out to you if they have more questions, or, you know, we can always have you back and we can host a longer training if people are interested. Let's see, I think most everything is just comments, and we're almost out of time, but just for the recording and for everyone, let's see, what is the name of the product that you spray on privet?
So there are different, there's one herbicide, it's broadleaf specific called Triclopure, and you can purchase that under the trade name Garlon 4 or Garlon 3, depending on if you're spraying in an area that has water around it. Garlon 3 is for aquatic use. And then there's also Remedy. That's another trade name for Triclopure. I've also had a lot of success with Roundup and Imazapyr. Roundup is just your general glyphosate. It only kills things that are actively growing when you apply that to the green vegetation, but Imazapyr is a little bit stronger, and it kind of gives it an extra oomph.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. And I'd like to let everyone know that you can always reach out to your local extension office, and they can point you in the right direction for herbicide applications. One more question really fast. What spray should I use to kill Japanese honeysuckle vines? I've had some luck with glyphosate and Triclopure mix, but thought you'd know something better.
I think I read one time that if you actually mix Triclopure and glyphosate together, it reduces the efficacy of the Triclopure. I would go maybe with the Roundup and a Imazapyr mix and see how that works. I like to experiment and take one mixture and spray on one side of a plant or of a group of plants, and then spray on the other side and come back 2 weeks later and see which one's working better. But I would experiment maybe with the Roundup. You can just buy that at a big box store. I think it's called Brush Be Gone is Triclopure, but it has a different name.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for your questions. And we can't recommend iNaturalist and Seek enough. So thank you so much, Patrick, for your presentation.